The mahogany door to Committee Room 254 in the office building of Rayburn House pushed open with such force that everyone turned to look. The 27-year-old White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, stood in the doorway, frozen, her normally confident face replaced by something no one had ever seen before. Desperation. Her navy blue suit, normally immaculately pressed, had tiny wrinkles from what looked like a night without sleep. In her shaking hands, she held a manila folder that would either salvage her career or reduce it to ashes. Across the table, Representative Jasmine Crockett sat at the committee table, her face chiseled from stone. The Texas Democrat, who was famous for her tough courtroom history as a public defender, had that morning filed an $80 million defamation suit, a suit that might put the brakes on Leavitt's political future before she is 28. The air in the room was so tense you could cut it with a knife. "Ms. Crockett," the voice cracked while speaking, something that had never occurred in her hundreds of press conferences. "I have to talk to you before this gets any further." The whole room went silent. C-SPAN cameras rolled. Reporters' fingers poised over their phones to break the story of the century. What would transpire next would be the most viewed congressional moment in the history of America, with more than 50 million views in 24 hours. But first, let's go back to what drove Caroline out of it. The youngest and possibly the toughest White House press secretary in history. Literally beg her political rival before Congress. Make sure you press that subscribe button and the notification bell, because what you are about to see is political drama at its highest level. And believe me, you don't want to miss a second of this tale. Leave a comment below and let us know where you're viewing from, because this clash is headline news from Washington to Tokyo. To comprehend why this moment was so stunning, you have to know who these women are and how they arrived at this incendiary clash. Caroline Leavitt had established herself as the Trump administration's iron wall. At only 27, she'd be the youngest White House press secretary in U.S. history. With her quick wit and unflappable cool, raised in New Hampshire by a middle-class family, she'd worked her way from a college internship to the most influential spokesperson role in government. Her Catholic upbringing and small-town beginnings had earned her hero status to conservative America. She was the one who'd knocked off Hollywood icon Robert Duro on television a few months prior, winning the moniker the Gen Z Gladiator. She'd stand each morning at that podium in the James S. Reddy press conference room, confronting an adversarial press pack with a grin that never faltered. She'd fended off scandals, parried inflammatory policies, and converted each barrage into a counterattack. Political pundits referred to her as Trump's secret weapon, a young woman who could appeal to voters while dispatching opponents with surgical accuracy. Jasmine Crockett was made of a very different fabric. However, the Texas 30th District Representative had been a public defender in Dallas for years, advocating for people who couldn't advocate for themselves. She'd won cases everyone had said she couldn't win, battling the system and coming out on top. When she entered Congress, she applied that same intensity in the courtroom to Capitol Hill. Her questioning at committee hearings had become the stuff of legend. She didn't simply ask questions. She conducted live TV legal autopsies. Crockett had grown up in Lewis, brought up by a single mother who worked 3 jobs to put food on the table. She'd worked for her law degree through single-minded determination and decade-long student loans. While light symbolized the well-groomed establishment of the new Republican Party, Crockett represented the scrappy toughness of progressive Democrats who'd clawed their way up from humble beginnings. It was the tension between the two that had been building for months. It began with mild sparring at press conferences that Crockett would occasionally attend. Then there were the social media discussions that had millions taking sides. But all of this changed 3 days ago when Leavitt uttered words on a Fox News interview that would lose her everything. She had been talking about immigration policy when she was questioned by the host about Crockett's new border security proposals. Leavitt's reaction was quick and biting. Representative Crockett's so-called border security credentials are as real as her designer handbags. Some individuals speak about working-class Americans while sporting $3,000 suits. That's not speaking for the people. That's speaking for yourself. The remark went viral within minutes. What Leavitt didn't realize, however, was that Crockett had been taping it all, constructing a case that would stun the political universe. The designer handbag remark wasn't merely a slur. Crockett's staff had found it was founded on a made-up anecdote planted by a political staffer. These bags were presents from her deceased grandmother, purchased with the savings of a lifetime spent working as a seamstress. The suits purchased at discount or donated by patrons who wished their representative to present themselves professionally in Congress. In 48 hours, the legal staff of Crockett had filed an $80 million cents defamation suit alleging willful malice, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and injury to reputation. The suit did not just name Leavitt individually, it named the White House Communications Office, Fox News, and 3 prominent Republican donors who had supposedly plotted the attack. The stakes were never higher. For Lev, it was not just about money she did not have. It was her whole future. At 27, she might be on the verge of financial devastation. The collapse of her political career and the embarrassment of being the press secretary who lost the White House millions in a lawsuit. Her mentors were already sidling away. Republican contributors were raising eyebrows. Even Trump himself had been remarkably mum on Truth Social. For Crockett, however, this was about vindication that went beyond personal. She'd frame this as a fight against the politics of personal devastation, a defiance against the rich and powerful who believed they could say whatever they wanted about whoever without accountability. Her fundraising had gone ballistic since suing. Progressive groups were mobilizing on her behalf. She was lined up for primetime interviews on all the major networks. But something else was going on, something that made this showdown even more charged. Behind closed doors, each of these women had received information on the other that could ruin her career. Leavitt had records indicating that Crockett had made some questionable financial moves. When she was a public defender, Crockett possessed recordings of Leavitt from her college days that contradicted her carefully manicured public persona. It wasn't merely a lawsuit, it was mutually assured destruction, and the 2 women knew it. The question was, who would blink first? The committee room was charged as Leavitt shuffled 3 tentative steps forward. All the eyes in the room followed her. The confident pace that had seen her through hundreds of press briefings was absent, replaced by something that resembled almost a death march. "Miss Crockett," Leavitt insisted, her tone firmer this time, yet still with an undertone of something desperate. "I realize that you have every reason to disbelieve me, but there are things, significant things, which need to be said before this is allowed to proceed any further." Crockett didn't stir. She sat on the committee table like a judge on a bench, her dark eyes on Leavitt with a depth that could melt steel. She was dressed in a deep purple suit, the color of royalty, of power, of someone who controlled all the cards and knew it. Her silence was calculated, deliberate, making Leavitt fill the gap. "I know I said what I shouldn't have," Lee went on, inching closer to the table. Her heels clicking on the marble floor reverberated through the quiet room. "But this lawsuit, $80 million, no sense. You're not attacking me. You're attacking individuals who had nothing to do with my remarks. Employees with families. People who, what Crockett's voice sliced through the room like a knife. It was the first word she'd said, and the authority in her voice made a few of the gallery going, people jump. People who believed they could ruin my career for political capital. People who believed a black woman from St. Louis wouldn't return fire. Yep, the racial aspect hit with a bomb. Everyone was aware it had been boiling under the surface, but Crockett had just brought it out into the open. Leavitt's face flushed. Whether embarrassment or anger, no one could say that's not what this was about. "Leavitt," protested, her hands clenched around the folder. "You know that's not. I know precisely what this was about." Crockett rose to her feet slowly like an animal that had bided her time, waiting for the moment when she would strike. "You thought you could shoot your mouth off at me because I'm a soft target. The outraged black woman, right? The one who doesn't have a place in your upscale political sphere is absolutely not. So what was it about?" Miss Leavitt Crockett moved around the table, bridging the space between them. "Please explain this, committee. Explain to us why you felt compelled to lie about my grandmother's generosity. Explain to us why you felt the need to fabricate stories about my attire. Explain to us why the youngest press secretary in U.S. history felt it necessary to punch down on a freshman congresswoman." The room was so silent, you could almost hear the air conditioning running. Lee's standard suit of armor of rapid retorts and deflections had left her utterly unsuccessful. For the first time in her life as a politician, she appeared just what she was, a 27-year-old who had gotten herself way over her head. "I have information," Lead said abruptly, lifting the manila folder off her desk ever so slightly. "Information that I believe you need to view prior to is that a threat." Crockett's tone chilled. "Killed cold. Are you standing before this committee? Before these cameras attempting to blackmail me?" No Lever's reaction was instantaneous, panicked, "No. That is, I'm attempting to explain that this is more complex than complicated." Crockett had laughed, but it was not a funny laugh. "Let me break it down for you. Lied, you got caught. Now you're going to pay. That is not complicated. That is consequences." Representative Jim Jordan, chairman of the committee, finally stepped in. "Ladies, maybe we should, with respect." Mr. Chairman Crockett didn't even glance at him, her gaze still fixed on Levity. "Miss Leavitt came here uninvited. If she has something to tell, let her tell it for everyone to hear. No backroom deals, no behind-the-scenes negotiations. If she wants to plead, let her plead in public." The term beg hung in the air like a gauntlet. Leavitt's jaw clenched, and for an instant, the old blaze danced in her eyes. This was the woman who had confronted the entire White House press corps daily, who had made veteran reporters seem like novices. But the blaze vanished as suddenly as it had been lit. "Fine," Liebert whispered. "Beg in public." She steadied herself, and then in a gesture that stunned everyone from her own staff to the very journalist she was addressing, Caroline Leavitt did what no White House press secretary had ever done before. She knelt. The room erupted. Cameras blazed like strobe lights. Reporters sprang to their feet. A woman in the gallery gasped so loudly that it resonated off the walls. But Leavitt remained there on her knees, gazing up at Jasmine Crockett, with tears beginning to well up in her eyes. "Please," Leavitt croaked, "I'm begging you. Drop the lawsuit. Not for me. I've earned whatever you want to throw my way. But there are innocent folks who will be ruined by this. Sarah Martinez, the intern who's been with us only 3 weeks. She's listed in your filing. She's 22 years old, first in her family to graduate college. Tom Bradley, the communications assistant, he has a special needs daughter. The insurance from this job is keeping her in therapy. These folks didn't make my remarks. They don't deserve to lose everything because of my error." Crockett had stood silent, obviously not anticipating this. Power had shifted in a manner no one had predicted. The great press secretary on her knees, the freshman congresswoman towering above her. It was an image that would define their careers. "Stand up," Crockett told her softly. "Not until you stand up." The authority in Crockett's voice was unmistakable. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to embarrass yourself and make me the villain. Stand up at once or I leave, and we let the lawyers decide everything." Limits slowly struggled to her feet, her knees trembling. Tears were now streaming freely down her face, destroying the makeup that had been painstakingly applied only an hour earlier. The folder in her hands was curled up at the edges from where she'd been holding it. "You want to know what's really pathetic?" Crockett demanded, her voice ringing out across the room. "It's not you on your knees. It's that you only think about consequences when they hit you. Where was this interest in innocent people when you were lying about me? Where was this compassion when you were trying to destroy my reputation?" "I was doing my job," Leavitt managed weakly. "Your task," Crockett's voice escalated for the first time. "Your task is to defame people's grandmothers. Your task is to belittle a person's heritage. Your task is to politicize poverty, shame against someone who truly experienced it." The committee room had turned into an arena, and all those present were aware they were observing something which would be discussed for years. The young press secretary, once invincible, was being taken apart piece by piece by a freshman congresswoman with no risk to lose and a point to prove. "You have no idea what you've done," Crockett went on, her voice falling back into that cold, controlled tone that was even more frightening than yelling. "My grandmother worked her fingers to the bone in a factory for 40 years. She pinched every penny to spend it on me, on fine things, so I could walk into any room and be home. And you made a joke out of it. You made her love my liability." Leavitt opened her mouth for reply, but Crockett raised a hand. I'm not done. You and I, Miss Light, are more alike than you think. We're both young women who are struggling in a world that's always reminding us that we don't belong. The difference is I punch up, you punch down. I battle systems, you battle people. And that's why you stand here shattered by your own words while I'm going to be 80 million or richer. Please lift up attempted once more. The folder. There's something on who the actual source of those talking points is. I didn't make them up. They originated from who? Crockett pressed. Who instructed you to come at me? Who provided you with your lines? Leavitt had scanned the room. Obviously conflicted, they all leaned in. This was it. The moment that she would either save herself by throwing another person under the bus or sink with the ship. Steve Hoffman, she stated at last. Senior advisor Steve Hoffman. He authored the talking points. He conducted the opposition research. He instructed me to utilize it in the Fox interview. Another burst of noise. Steve Hoffman was one of Trump's senior advisors, a man he had been with since the initial campaign. If Leavitt was accurate, this scandal reached the top. And you've got evidence of that, Crockett demanded, looking at the folder. Emails, texts, even a tape-recorded phone call where he actually instructs me to kill you before you can build more power. Crockett stood there in silence. For a very long time, taking this in, the room breathed. Give me the folder, she said at last. Leavitt tremblingly handed it over. Crockett opened it hastily, reading its contents. Her face didn't change, but the way she stood relaxed a little. This is interesting, Crockett spoke slowly. But it doesn't alter what you did. You could have refused. You could have said no. You made yourself his tool. I know, Leavitt said, the struggle entirely out of her voice. I know I did, and I'll be sorry for the rest of my life. But don't punish innocent individuals for my decisions. Crockett shut the folder and stared at Leavitt for a long time. The whole room was on pins and needles waiting for her ruling. What she did next would be the most dramatized event in congressional history. Jasmine Crockett began to circle Caroline Leavitt slowly, like a prosecutor moving around a witness. The sound of her heels clicking against marble produced a rhythm that appeared to be synchronized with everyone's heartbeat. You know what your issue is, Liv Crockett said, the sound of her voice reaching every area of the room with perfect clarity. You've never had real repercussions. You've spent your whole life in a bubble where saying sorry makes things disappear, where weeping means forgiveness, where youth and blonde hair and remorse are sufficient. Leavitt winced at every word, but didn't react. Her mascara had smudged and black rivulets ran down her cheeks that photographers later described as making her appear like a shattered doll. But I was raised different, Crockett went on. Where I'm from, what you do has consequences. Actual ones. The kind that don't disappear because you cry about them. My mother couldn't cry her way out of an eviction letter. My grandmother wasn't able to beg her way into a decent-paying job. Everything we fought for, and we discovered that when you come after you don't just fight, you annihilate. Representative Jordan attempted to interrupt again. Mr. Crockett, maybe we ought to adjourn. No recess. Crockett exploded, still staring at Leavitt. She wanted this in the public eye. She came here to this committee room knowing cameras were rolling. She wanted the spectacle. Well, she's got it. Crockett opened the folder again, pulling out one of the documents. Let's read what your mentor, Steve Hoffman, really thinks about you, shall we? This is from an email dated 2 weeks ago. She cleared her throat and read, Leavitt is good for the time being. Youthful, ambitious, and stupid enough to be a fall guy when necessary. Have her in the public eye in case things go awry. She's disposable. The color had drained from Leavitt's face entirely. She appeared to be on the verge of fainting. Disposable? Crockett repeated. That's what you're to them. A face to take the bullets while they sit safely in their offices. And you were so keen to oblige them that you didn't even notice. That's not Steve Wooden. Leavitt's objection faded as Crockett produced another document. Here's another one. This is from an SMS thread between Hoffman and benefactor Richard Blackstone. The Crockett strike is ideal for Leavitt. If it succeeds, we reap the credit. If it blows up, she'll take the fall. Win-win. The look of betrayal on Leavitt's face was absolute. She collapsed into a chair beside her. All the strength drained from her legs. You see, Miss Leavitt, while you were ranting at me for things that weren't even real, The men you were defending were writing your dismissal, while you were kneeling in front of me, pleading with me for mercy. They're most likely sitting in their offices at this very moment writing your resignation letter. As if on cue, Leavitt's phone rang. She gazed at it with shaking hands. Her pale face turned utterly white. "Let me guess," Crockett said. "The White House would like to have you come down right away." Leavitt nodded wordlessly. "They're firing you," Crockett declared bluntly.